Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. For all of us at Wisconsin Facets, we'd like to welcome you to our webinar today entitled Tribal, Community, and School Liaisons, a rich resource for IEP teams. Today, our presenters are Eva Kabinski and David O'Connor. Eva is a school administration consultant on the special education team at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. She is the consultant for American Indian Studies with the IEP. She is the consultant for specially designed adaptive physical education, traumatic brain injury, other health impairment, orthopedic impairment, special education licensing, and cross-categorical programs. David O'Connor is the American Indian Studies consultant at the Department of Public Instruction. He is also the program lead for the Network for Native American Student Achievement and the Culturally Responsive Early Childhood Tribal Project with the Disproportionality Technical Assistance Network, or Network. In David's role at the DPI, he supports school districts' efforts to provide instruction on the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of Wisconsin's American Indian nations and tribal communities, often referenced as Wisconsin Act 31 and the education of Native American students. David is originally from and is a member of the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa in northern Wisconsin. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you today Eva Kabinski and David O'Connor.
Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate your having us on today and letting us share some ideas with your audience. As you mentioned, I am the consultant that's responsible for supporting American Indian students with IEPs, and I feel very privileged to be given this role. Before I came to the department, I actually worked for a federally funded technical assistance program where I did a lot of work with various tribal nations, communities, and the Bureau of Indian Education, as well as the office or the Department of Education when it came to issues around American Indian students. And it has been a real privilege to be able to work with educators that support American Indian students. I'd also like to give David a moment just to share a little bit about himself.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is, as mentioned earlier, my name is David O'Connor. I'm the American Indian Studies consultant here at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Some of my primary roles is here, as mentioned briefly earlier, is the history, working with school districts, CISAs, and other entities across the state of Wisconsin, providing instruction on Wisconsin, American history, culture, and tribal sovereignty, offer reference as Wisconsin Act 31 in our state, as well as education of Native American students. And so I look forward to engaging in dialogue as well as opportunity to connect with you during this presentation today. So thank you.
And as we go through this, as Bonnie mentioned, if you have questions for us, please put them into the chat box and we will answer them later. To kind of give you a little bit of an idea of why we're doing this, David and I started talking about this when he first came to the department. When I worked for that federally funded technical assistance center, I got to work with the Minnesota Department of Education. And one of the things that Minnesota does is that all of their American Indian liaisons that are hired in their school districts, both public and Bureau of Indian Education schools, are trained in the basics of special education so that they can be a resource and almost an advocate for parents of American Indian students when they're involved in the IEP process. And I thought that was just such a really wonderful idea because there are some special issues that come up for students who are American Indian that might not come up for students from other racial and ethnic groups. And what we also there have a very rich resource to draw upon in terms of understanding the student, the community, and various other aspects that can influence how a student does in school. So what we're going to talk about today is talk about some of the resources available, as well as doing a review of the College and Career Ready IEP process, or CCR IEP, and start to build a context, whether you're a liaison yourself, whether you are a parent or an administrator or an educator, just start thinking about ways that you can incorporate some of the resources available to you. Now, before we go any further, what I would like to do is to provide an acknowledgement that we, as a department, acknowledge and honor the inherent sovereignty of each of the American Indian nations in Wisconsin. And you'll see on your slide that there is a map with the 11 federally recognized American Indian nations and the one non-federally recognized and non-state recognized nations. The land we are on here for today's webinar as presenters and as listeners is that of the people in 12 nations of Wisconsin. DPI will continue to cultivate and maintain our ongoing collaboration and partnership with each of the American Indian nations, people, and communities of Wisconsin. And I do have to say we are very lucky as a state to have such a rich and diverse group that really can provide greater understanding and community as we work with different students. So again, the purpose of today's webinar is to talk about the roles that the tribal community and school liaisons play in Wisconsin schools and districts. We also are doing this, like as I said, we're going to talk about the 5 beliefs within the College and Career Ready IEP process, and then do a little bit of chatting about the existing and possible connections between the liaisons and the special education process when it comes to our American Indian students with IEPs. And part of the reason that Dave and I are doing this is in recognition of the impact of both disproportionality and inaccurate identification and placement of our American Indian students. In general, schools are not doing as good of a job as they could be in supporting the meaningful involvement of parents in the special education process, which is the only way to improve it for our Native students. We're hoping to change that by starting this dialogue. Hang on, just a moment, I went a little too far.
So, and as we talk about what it means about educational equity, what it means to us at the agency here at DPI, we have a definition that we use in terms across our agency in terms of a lot of our work, either with trainings or workshops across our state, as well as the work that we do internally here. And that every student has access to the educational resources and regular needs right at the moment in their education. Across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, family background, and or family income. So for students with IEPs, we work to ensure that students have effective educational resources to help them attain a free and appropriate education as well. It's a lot of work that we engage in, as example, is about changing the narrative. And so a lot of times, as you can see from this image shown on the webinar here today, there's a difference between equality, equity, as well as liberation. And so a lot of opportunities that we try to talk about is not only making sure a model that I always try to use in trainings and workshops that we do, it's about meeting students where they are, not where they need to be. And so giving them, him or her, the resources that they can help to make sure that they are successful in any educational opportunities that they're given to them.
Okay, so we're going back to that, to now defining what is a tribal community and school liaison in Wisconsin. And they've been called many things in the past. I know when I worked in the schools, I called them my homeschool coordinators, or I called them or they were called tutors, or Title VI, which is a federal Indian education funding source, Title VI consultant or Title VI director. Basically, in Wisconsin, you could also call them, as I said, homeschool coordinators, Title VI education coordinators and program staff members, as well as Johnson O'Malley coordinators and program staff members. And Johnson O'Malley is another program that provides support for American Indian students in schools that oftentimes comes via the tribal nation as opposed to through the school. So the question is, what do we need to do if we want someone to be licensed as a tribal community school liaison in Wisconsin?
So, and just real quick with the title, we wanted to be more reflective of the work that our colleagues across the state are engaged in. So obviously a lot of work that these individuals that were that Eva was referencing regarding either being a homeschool coordinator, Johnson O'Malley coordinator, or Title VI Indian education coordinators, want to have something that had more meaning behind it in terms of what it was that means specifically about the roles that they do, the fantastic work that they do and work with our students and families and nations across the state. And so when we look at that different terminology, we came up with tribal community school liaison. So they work with our tribal communities, they work directly with the community, and obviously work with the schools themselves. And so what are some requirements that are required to become a licensed tribal community school liaison in the state of Wisconsin? So there's two pieces to that. So authorization, a license issued under this section authorizes a license holder to work as a tribal community school and liaison in American language and culture education program. A license to serve as a liaison in American Indian language and culture program is not mandatory. The eligibility piece, the state may issue a tribal community and school liaison license under this section if at all applying to PI 340532A.
So what we want to look at is to be sure that the applicant is competent and for the license, so that we're providing the most effective and knowledgeable people to work with our American Indian students. And the competency is actually determined by a designee of a local American Indian Parent Advisory Committee and one of the following: either the district administrator of the employing school district or the administrator of the employing alternative school. And the applicant, upon receiving this license, is certified to be competent in the Associated American Indian language and is knowledgeable about the history and culture of the Associated American Indian population. This certification of this paragraph shall be made by one of the following entities as determined by the associated tribal government, either the Tribal Council, the Tribal Language Division, or the local American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. So what we're doing is we're going back and, in recognition of the sovereignty of our American Indian nations in Wisconsin, we're asking them to be the ones to determine if a candidate for this licensure is qualified and capable of fulfilling their role. So, David, what do the tribal community school liaisons do in their role in Wisconsin schools?
So as you can see on the screen, and these are not just limited to these. There's a lot of our tribal community school liaisons do a lot more, do also have other obligations, other duties or responsibilities as well. But we just want to kind of highlight a few as examples of some of the amazing work that they engage in across our state as colleagues that work with our students, families, and communities and nations in our state. So obviously, first and foremost, being the community liaison with that nation or tribal community. Sometimes this individual may be a liaison between multiple nations, maybe in the vicinity or with that nation that's adjacent to them, as example. Have an opportunity to be for educational interventions supports. Like I said, being that individual where they can be part of the IEP process, as example, if the parent or family wishes him or her to be part of that, as well as involvement in other different opportunities, either academic, social, other different things as well. as well as be an advocate for that parent. Like I just mentioned a minute ago, about being part of different meetings that maybe the schools has, being part, having that individual, making sure that they share information or other things that could be conveyed to the parents or families that they work with. I'll definitely be a cultural support, especially be that connection between the tribal nations themselves as well as the communities, making sure that they have an opportunity to work with other colleagues in their school or district regarding better supports for their Native students, as well as act as a resource for schools and educators as well. A lot of times when folks are looking at resources and materials that can help support their instruction and or other different opportunities, these individuals are seen as some of the folks that are the go-to right away. So.
And David, you mentioned that you're the co-director for the network. What are some things that you do to support the tribal school community liaisons just through your role?
Sure. So some of the work that we have engaged, so as the grant director, one of the 2 grant directors for the network, we always hold 3 regional trainings throughout the year, as well as 1 statewide training with tribal community and school liaisons. And the premise of that is to have an opportunity for folks to have an opportunity to network with each other between other districts, to have an opportunity to learn about some of the great work that they're maybe engaged in, as well as have an opportunity to think about ways that they can help bring some of those practices back to their school or district, as example. When we have our also statewide one, this opportunity to have an opportunity for all folks across the state to share about that great work as well, and think about what things that they could be doing next as well. And so we try to create those spaces for those individuals, so they see that themselves as being not only that they do this work, but they also have other colleagues across other districts that can help support one another as well.
Thank you, David. And I do have to confess, I've attended many of those trainings and they are just wonderful. And Wisconsin has really some amazing tribal school community liaisons who come from a variety of backgrounds and have those different roles. But you know, the main thing is that they really care about the students they work with, and we appreciate the work that they do. So now the special education portion. So one of the things that we've had to do in the last several years is revisit and change how we're addressing special education, because while we were doing pretty well when it came to meeting compliance, we weren't seeing the outcomes that we wanted to see. And as a result, we ended up developing the Reading Drives Achievement model, which is the RDA. And what we do is we are now focusing on the reading instruction and progress of all students with IEPs, not just those with specific learning disabilities in the area of reading. And this is what we've committed based on feedback from various stakeholders to be one of the main content data source or topics that we're going to share with OSIP every year, and that we will be judged upon how our students are doing and whether we're seeing improvement. And to do that, one of the things that we did is we developed the College and Career Ready IEP process and revised our sample IEP forms to promote discussions aimed at improving student outcome, so that when we take a look at a student, we're looking at their disability-related needs, not just the label that we think that they deserve. So the CCR IEP process focuses on improving access, engagement, and progress in meeting early childhood grade level standards based on curriculum, instruction, and environments. So we're looking at American Indian students in Wisconsin who have IEPs. This year, when we did the child count, this is the variability in terms of the areas of disability. The largest one is a specific learning disability, followed by other health, followed by speech and language, and then other health impairments. So those are the top 3 areas. Other areas are less frequent, which is actually in some ways good. Deaf and hard of hearing and traumatic brain injury are our medical numbers. The identification of those students is based on medical criteria. Now you'll notice that under the traumatic brain injury, we don't have any. That's incorrect. We do actually have a number of students, but because the number is less than 20, we're not putting that number on in the event that that might actually cause an identification of an individual student. But again, this is just to kind of give you an idea of the areas that students are identified in. And I will tell you, I think it would have been the emotional behavioral disabilities and the other health impairment just 10 years ago would have been flipped. What's happened is as we've started to recognize disproportionality and the impact it has on students, we saw a shift in terms of how people started looking at the students and trying to be more authentic in their assessment and really get down to the student needs rather than the perceptions. So that what we're hopefully identifying is a true disability as opposed to a racial or cultural difference. Recently, we had a major Supreme Court ruling, which has been referred to as Andrew F. And this ruling has reinforced what we've been doing in Wisconsin, but also puts more of a spotlight. Because what happened was that prior to Andrew F., we just had to show some improvement. But what Andrew F. did was that they actually provided the clarification that FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, requires an IEP to be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in the light of a child's circumstances. Now, that was what we expected FAPE to be for students before that, but what was happening was we were seeing really tiny, almost meaningless changes and advances. We actually want to see true progress that's meaningful, but also looked at within the context of the child's needs and abilities. For most students, that means an IEP designed to allow a student to progress from grade to grade. But if that's not possible, then the IEP should be enough to continue to have them move on. Goals might differ, but each and every child should have a chance to meet the challenging objectives. And again, that it be something meaningful. We actually have an information bulletin 18.2, which you can find on our website that provides more information. So the question is, when we think about the status of American Indian students and the historical background, the impact of various issues in the past on how both parents and students saw school, can an IEP team, which in Wisconsin will primarily be made up of non-Native people because we do not have an extremely large number of American Indian teachers and educators, can these IEP teams develop IEPs for American Indian students that are reasonably calculated to enable that child to make progress? If we're coming from a majority-focused standpoint. And that's, again, where the work that David's been doing in terms of training both teachers, educators, and liaisons in our Wisconsin American Indian history and tribal cultures to try and increase the understanding, but sometimes we just need somebody who is part of that community to help us understand. So going back to what is a CCR IEP, it's what Wisconsin is utilizing for all students ages 3 through 21 that are eligible under IDEA, and an individualized education program developed to meet the unique disability-related needs of the student, not their label, but the needs of the student, and help ensure that the student graduates ready for further education, work, and living in the community. And our emphasis, again, is on improving outcomes, not just meeting compliance. And again, the CCR IEPs build the knowledge and skills and habits through a student's academic experiences so that when they graduate, as I said, they'd be ready for going back out into the world. And we want to make sure that when we developed the CCR IEP process, including both the 5 beliefs and the 5 step process, that this does include compliance, but also improve student outcomes. And I can tell you personally, I just was at a school district that one of the districts I'm responsible for, and we did a validation because every 7 years, your school district has to be part of a procedure compliant self-assessment, which has now been modified to address the issues within our CCR IEP process. And it's really changing the conversations. And I have to really give kudos to the special education team under the leadership of Dr. Barbara Van Haren and Julia Hartwig and our superintendent, Carolyn Stanford Taylor, for this approach to the IEP process that really, really tries to make sure that we're putting the focus on the I of individualized. Okay, so the next part are the power of the 5 beliefs. The CCR IEP 5 beliefs are at the core of the CCR IEP process. They're essential to developing CCR IEPs that promote college and career readiness. It is foundational for families and educators to embrace these 5 core beliefs. We encourage districts and IEP teams to consider and discuss these beliefs and how they influence practices around IEP development in particular, and the education of students with disabilities in general. So if we're looking to have some other people become involved in this process, for example, the liaisons, then it's important for them to be part of this conversation and to understand this process. So when we talk about high expectations, that means believing students with disabilities can meet preschool and grade level academic standards and functional expectations, or for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, alternate achievement standards aligned with grade level standards. We also want to make sure that we utilize culturally responsive practices to both honor and engage students and their families. We also want to develop positive student relationships between peers and adults to foster access, engagement, and progress, as well as self-efficacy, self-advocacy, and independence. We recognize, as we have for a long time, but again, cannot say this enough, the importance of family and community engagement. And the collective responsibility we all have as educators to work together to support each student in achieving their IEP goals. No one person owns any given student. We all have responsibilities for how they do in their progress. In addition to the 5 beliefs, we also have a 5-step process. So as I go through these, I would encourage you to think about how you could use someone like one of the liaisons within this process. So the first step is to understand the achievement of grade level academic standards and functional expectations to help you understand and identify the student's unique strengths and needs in relation to those expectations. We also need to think about how we identify how the student's disability affects access, engagement, and progress, and identify the student's unique disability-related needs. And that's something that you're going to be hearing a lot from us. We also want to then take those identified unique needs and determine what specific, clear, measurable, ambitious, and achievable goals are needed to support the student in meeting standards and expectation. And again, I always say you also need to really make sure that those goals are meaningful, that they're really going to show a change. We also need to then think about what IEP services should be aligned to support the goals and needs. And then last but not least, we do have a system to analyze progress throughout the duration of the IEP to make sure that we understand what is working and what isn't working so that we can make a rapid change if needed if something's not working. For too long, we've tried something and it just hasn't worked and we'll keep trying it when we could instead be shifting to something else that might be more effective. We don't want to give up too soon, but if it becomes clear that progress is not happening, we need to be able to then get back together, review what we know about the student, and start this process all over again. Oh, I'm sorry. New, this is a new computer to me, and I keep going too far. My apologies. Let me, oh, well, thank you. Thank you, David. David's my technical assistant today. So we went over the 5-step process, and as I mentioned before, family engagement is truly important. And in some ways, you know, we've heard the saying before, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community also. So that family engagement should incorporate what's important and valued in the community. And that's where I would encourage you to make sure that you think about that part too. And to make sure that this happens, a family engagement question was added to the I-4 to encourage IEP teams to plan ways to engage parents and other family members in the education of the student. And what is recorded in the I-4 form should be a description of what the school district will do to engage families, not what the parents are expected to do. And again, districts cannot require a family to provide services needed to ensure the student receives FAPE. That is the school district's responsibility. Parents and families are important members of the IEP team and are encouraged to share information throughout the process. However, since not all families have had positive experiences in school, this is where sometimes it's helpful to have somebody with them that can provide support and help them organize their thoughts and share information. So I'd like to have some discussion with my colleague David, talking about the experiences of our tribal community school liaisons and their roles regarding how we might see this happen regarding the 5 beliefs. And again, those 5 beliefs are having high expectations, utilizing culturally responsive practices, encouraging student relationships with peer and educators, family and community engagement, and collective responsibility. Now, if you remember what the roles were, again, community liaisons with the nations or tribal communities, educational intervention and support, parent guardian, family and nation involvement support, advocacy, cultural support, and resources.
One thing that we've been talking about here, and even some of our discussions with some of our folks who have those roles in our school districts or with our nations directly. So using some of the terms, so instead of maybe sometimes saying parent or guardian, a lot of them have been saying we should say family advisory committees, or using the word family, because how that looks for each individual family. And so we want to be more inclusive rather than exclusive. So I just want to be mindful of those. Some of the language that we've been using as examples as well.
Okay, so let's start with the area of high expectations. What do you think? Okay, some of the ideas that we've talked about in the past have included helping parents and students organize their thoughts and ideas, especially regarding student strengths and talents. What are some other ways that we could utilize the liaisons to really address that issue of high expectations?
So some of the things that I think about as examples, when they have some of those roles that they play as example, when they're helping students selecting courses as example, how they're part of that process and making sure that not only the students are and have the best interest of the students, but also including those individuals' families as well, and making sure that they're thinking about, as we talk about here, about being college and career ready as example. And so making sure that they have information and tools and resources to make some of the best selections about coursework that maybe sometimes they may not be encouraged to take, but these individuals give them that little extra push to think about some of those next steps for themselves in those next careers and or higher education opportunities as examples.
Well, and we know that for students, sometimes they need that educator to help push them, to give them a different perspective on themselves. I know you shared that you had a teacher that was very special to you, who took you from where you were to help you become really an unbelievable educator and advocate. Uh,
So, as someone, I've along the way in my educational career, I've always had great people who've always been mentors or folks who stepped up a little bit more extra, I guess you could say, and provide me with guidance. And so either as Eva was talking about, I always think back to some of my earliest memories of my second grade teacher as example, or thinking about my homeschool coordinator who was in high school. As I mentioned earlier, that's the title we use here now is Tribal Community School Liaison. But his role that he was always very positive, making sure that I was when I wanted to look at going on college trips as example, he had an opportunity to take myself and other students to go look at other campuses or colleges across Wisconsin and elsewhere. And so I always made sure that I was pushing myself to be a better, not only a student, but just be a better person all the time. And so I was like saying about high expectations. It wasn't just in the school itself or in the classroom where this individual would push me. It would always be even outside of that. And so thinking about that, almost like that, going back to that community role that they play a lot of times as well, where they're engaged in conversation and dialogue with not only my family, but as well as other folks that knew me really well, making sure that I was staying positive, making sure I was on the right track, I guess you could say.
Thank you, David. Well, and that kind of comes down to the next one, which is the culturally responsive practices. Because as I mentioned before, we're a predominantly non-native state when it comes to educators. We do have some really wonderful American Indian educators and administrators, but we don't have as many as we would like. So an American Indian student is more likely than not to have a white or non-native educator as a teacher or as their administrator. So what does this cause to happen when it comes to the student's education?
So a lot of times, like this can be universal. It's just about tapping into students' interests. And so as example, when I talked about my second grade teacher, what Eva was referring to earlier, I mentioned briefly, one of my interests that I like to read or like to look at was comic books. And so as someone who loved looking at comic books, especially looking at the images or the visuals in there, she was engaging me. I would say that people would say, well, that's really not a cultural value, but my response it is, because it was something she was tapping of an area of culture that was meaningful or impactful for myself. And so I'm always thinking about that was actually my inroad to first learning how to read. Some of the things and materials that I saw before that I wasn't engaged in, but she understood that she can tap into some of those interests that I had as example. And so when I think about students in general, especially think about the multiple cultures that they come from, thinking about how to engage them from multiple areas, not just one specific area as example.
Yes, one of my opportunities and privileges was to actually work as a school psychologist in the Menominee Indian School District. And I know that one of the things that I valued so much was watching as both family members and educators would utilize things that the student did outside of school and that were more culturally based to talk about their strengths and to demonstrate what the student could do that might not be seen in the school setting itself. And that took some trust and some knowledge of the student that not all the educators had. So I think that's kind of leads us to the next one, which is the student relationships, which again, you said what played a huge factor in your school history.
So as I always shared in my trainings, a lot of times when I asked, so these two last points, culture and student relationships, obviously come hand in hand. So when I'm asked always to define the word culture, I always define it as relationship or relationships plus meaning. And so when I use that as example, I always think about those relationships that I have with that I've had either personally or I see our educators, specifically our tribal community school liaison, have with those our individual students. Sometimes plays a big part in their success. And so I think a lot of times, as you were talking about earlier, some of the role that they're asked to do sometimes go above and beyond, just like I said, the 8 to 5 or 8 to 4 as example. And so think about some of the things where I've had some of those individuals in the past either do home visits or have an opportunity to engage me at some of the community events as well, extend outside the classroom. And so for me, those things play a big part in terms of how folks see how relationships are developed, but even more importantly, as well as how they are maintained. And so I think, it's not just having them get developed, but also thinking about how they are grown over time and have those seeds be planted by those individuals to help support those students and families that they work with directly.
Doesn't that just slide into the next one, which is family and community engagement? Because again, we do have that issue of non-native educators who don't necessarily understand the community values and expectations, but oftentimes would really like to.
So one example that I always think about that I hear from folks like who are in this role, the tribal community school liaison role or other roles, is when they see those individuals in their communities. And so sometimes it's the little things and so as using as an example, I think about this one superintendent that people always reference in the state of Wisconsin, who is always at every function or at a good majority of the functions that the tribal community is hosting or having in their area. And it's not only just that individual showing up, but it's also his family or her family showing up as well. And so for me, I think that really sets the tone in terms of it's not just going back to what I was just mentioning a moment ago. That's not just 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 as example, but making sure that they're part of the community at different parts of the year, either being during winter break or other different things where they're being seen as being part of the community. And so even as example, one time when I was young, I saw my teacher at my polo, and it was right before back to school. And so when I saw this individual, I was kind of shocked to see him there, not in a bad way, but just kind of shocked that they were there. But when I had opportunity to greet them, they were asking me to talk to them about different things. And that really, to me, is that relationship piece that we were just talking about. So I got an opportunity to share about things that were important to me, and or just talk about things that were in my community as example. And it basically made me, as I remember thinking back to my time, made me feel very proud about who I was and where I came from.
And also that you get to be the expert, because we don't always give that chance to our students in terms of letting them teach us. And I think that's always a wonderful opportunity. And then that last idea of collective responsibility, that all students are every educator's responsibility. Again, the examples you shared really seem to promote that.
So when I think about that, where I felt I really had that collective responsibility in my PK through 12 education, especially my tribal Head Start. In my Head Start years, I really had a lot of that collective. A lot of the teachers always partner with each other, and I always had community members coming in. My K-12 experience didn't have that as much, and so I think a lot of times when we talk about that community partnerships with individuals or communities or leadership in those areas, I think really sets the tone in terms of making sure that they're not only having a voice or a seat at the table, but also at the same time making sure that they are being heard and listened to at all times. And so a lot of times I always believe that a lot of the issues and concerns that we sometimes see are right in our communities directly themselves and have the resources there. And so I want to definitely acknowledge those individuals who do amazing work every single day and serving our students, families, communities, and nations in Wisconsin. So.
And do you have an example that you might be able to share? Or?
Just, as I think about different examples, like I said, going back earlier to one example, when I think about the responsibility, going back to that superintendent, he started doing that himself in terms of having an opportunity to go out to the tribal community. But then he extended that invitation maybe as a courtesy to his other administrators. But over time, it started evolving into not only the other administrators, but other educators in the district as well. And so for me, it's this example of making sure growing your own or developing your staff that you have with you as well.
Thank you, David. Those are really, thank you for sharing your experiences and for helping demonstrate some of the things that we can see when we look closer at these, at the 5 beliefs. At this point in time, I think it would be a great opportunity to see if we have some questions from our audience. Bonnie, has anything come through?
Yeah, actually, I have 2 questions. One would be if someone wanted to have a listing of the tribal community liaisons, is there a posting of the people that might be able to serve in that capacity?
Unfortunately, not a listing, but like I said, if that's something that folks would like to see more of, we would definitely explore that as an example, and we can post it on the Wisconsin on my page at the DPI American Indian Studies program page. But I do currently have a listing of all the tribal education directors, as well as tribal historic preservation officers listed on the page, and so each of the nations have a representative listed on there as example for folks to reach out to. And so, like I said, when I think about tribal community and school liaison roles, I always want to make sure we include our tribal education directors as well. And so, like I said, I do have those listed on there for contact, both email as well as phone number as example.
That's great, because I think that that's what the person asking the question was interested in. And then, David, going back to one of the things that you said before, our questioner says, can you expound a little bit more on the culture plus meaning? Does that mean not only do we need to have an understanding, but we also have to have a respect?
I think it's a both. I mean, I can't see how you can have one on the other. And so one of the things that I always use in my talking piece when I explain that is the cultural iceberg. So a lot of times what I always try to convey to folks is, culture is not just, it's more than just foods, festivities, heroes, and holidays. And so culture is a lot deeper than that. And so when I think about the top of the iceberg, that's where that is at. When I talk about cultural aspects of it, it's starting to get on the grinds of different things from communication, relationship building, all these different things at the thing. But at the very bottom of that iceberg, I always tell people that's where the educators I had the best relationships with, and other folks, even all the way up until currently, those are the ones who saw me as David, as a Anishinaabe, or as a human being, I guess you could say, the best way to describe it. And so when I think about the cultural, the relationship or relationships plus meaning as example, it's transcending and making sure that think about things that maybe have interests that lie between each other, rather than always looking at the differences. And so that's what I'm trying to convey as example, because I think a lot of times we always try to look at what separates us rather than what makes us similar to one another.
Okay, thank you. And those are the two questions that we have right now. Do both of you have like a closing statement for us?
Sure. And I do have to again thank my colleague David for joining me today for this webinar. He has a really amazing amount of experience and knowledge. If you do get a chance to go to his website, you can just go to the DPI website and search for American Indian Studies. There are a ton of vetted resources. Trust me, because he made me help him vet some of them, that are really wonderful resources for parents, families, community members, educators to access. And we do have other opportunities throughout the year regarding education and American Indian students. If you have interest in attending something, the Wisconsin Indian Education Association Conference will be held in Milwaukee in April, on April 16th through 18th. And you can go to wiea.net and they provide more information. But even if you yourself are non-native, as I am not, I'm a white person who has had the privilege of working with American Indian communities and nations. It helps to really try to learn and understand the experiences, the history, the opportunities that have been available to our 12 nations here in Wisconsin. And I think that when we come down to it, the better we understand each other, the better we're able to support each other. David?
Sure. So just so I reiterate a couple of things, talk about resources and materials that we were talking about earlier. Definitely encourage, like as Eva just talked about, please do visit my program's webpage, which is the DPI American Indian Studies page, which is at dpi.wi.gov/AMIND. Also, we'll make sure to send some of these resources and materials that we're talking about earlier. We did ask the host to share with us your contact information so we can send out information as well. Also, we'd like to encourage you to check out the wisconsinfirstnations.org website. So a lot of resources and materials available on there as well. And so definitely look at some of these as examples of places that you can look at as being places where resources that have been vetted, as Eva talked about, that are out there for folks to be aware of or utilize as example. And so at any point in time, if you ever have anything that you think would be of value as well, maybe that's something that we don't see on the website, please let us know. I definitely would love to see if that would be something we could use as well. But on behalf of my program, as well as I also encourage you to look at maybe some other trainings or other professional development opportunities that we offer. All those are listed on the DPI American Indian Studies website, specifically under the calendar events section. So we do what we call sometimes online study circles. We also do in-person trainings at your local CESA, which is Cooperative Educational Service Agencies, all 12 across the state of Wisconsin, as well as partner with school districts in terms of having full day trainings at either the in-services and or summer programs as example as well. And so if you feel that they would be of interest to yourself, please do take advantage of those opportunities. And as well, make sure that you said, as Eva just talked about, check out WIEA, their statewide conference that they have this coming spring. So, but other than that, I just want to say thank you, or miigwech, which is thank you in Ojibwe, for the opportunity to talk with you. And hopefully, and I just want to say thank you to each of every one of you for everything that you do for our students, families, communities, and nations in the state of Wisconsin. So with that being said, thank you once again.
And again, this is Eva. If you are a parent or a family member of a child, American Indian child with IEPs, or if you are an educator working with a child, American Indian child with an IEP, and need to or want to just talk some things over, that's one of my roles here at the department. So please feel free to contact me via email or by phone. And Bonnie, thank you again for giving us a chance to share this information with your audience.
Yes. And thank you, Bonnie, and to Wisconsin Facets for the opportunity.
Well, thank you both, Eva and David, for an excellent presentation today. I know there's a wealth of resources, and I'm sure that all who participated will get the opportunity to view the resources that you've talked about. And thank you for sharing your contact information with our participants as well, because I'm sure that there will be some people who will be contacting you. So again, thank you very much to the both of you. This concludes.
Thank you.
Yep. This concludes our webinar today. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Please be reminded that Wisconsin Facets has over 80 scheduled trainings and webinars for 2020. Please check our website calendar and register for any of the trainings that you believe you may be interested in. And please watch for our short evaluation that will be coming your way after the conclusion of our live webinar today. Again, thank you to all of you who participated. Thank you again, Eva and David, and everybody have a wonderful day. Bye-bye, everybody.